War of the Worlds, The Resurrection. A novel by J.M. Dillard. Chapter 15. All of it. The flight, the taxicab ride to the hotel in Crystal City, an ugly patch of urban high-rises that sprouted up near the Pentagon, the restless night, the ride the next morning to the Pentagon with its endless parking lot, the waiting to get inside, the wait once inside to see General Wilson. All of it blurred into one hugely frustrating waste of time for Harrison. Everything was taking far too much time, and in the meanwhile, the aliens were free to roam the countryside to make what plans they could. And now, at approximately 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, a bleary-eyed Harrison found himself staring across the polished sheen of the government-issue desk at Brigadier General Henry J. Wilson. This was it. Quite literally do or die. If they couldn't convince Wilson, then it was the three of them, he, Norton, and Suzanne, against God knew how many revived alien forces. Not good odds at all, and for one of the very rare instances in his life, Harrison felt truly nervous. It didn't help matters that he hated the general instantly, and the way he figured it, he had at least 3 very good reasons to do so. First, because of the harm done Clayton Forrester and his project by the military. Second, because Harrison had tried all last night and this morning to call Charlotte and kept getting her answering machine. And third, because the general's face had lit up like the 4th of July at the sight of Suzanne. He'd climbed out of his chair, the smug bastard, and given her a bear hug right in front of Harrison. Then Suzanne had shocked him by giving Wilson a chaste, peck on the cheek. Oh, they tried hard enough to make it look like an affectionate sister-brother, haven't seen you in a long time sort of embrace, but Harrison knew better. And then Wilson had introduced himself without even having the decency to look embarrassed at his lechery. Obviously, the man wasn't one to give a damn about appearances. A wonder he'd ever made it this far in the military. And so, Harrison narrated silently, glancing at Suzanne in the chair next to his, the staid, upright Dr. McCullough reveals the truth about her less-than-upright past, and he resented Wilson for it. Resentment or jealousy? Oh, hell, Blackwood, knock it off. Who cares that he's old enough to be her father? None of your damn business. Besides, you've got another woman you're supposed to be worrying about at the moment. Wilson was old enough to be her father, of course. With his salt-and-pepper hair and bushy eyebrows and his pipe, he was a stocky, meticulous man in his starched uniform, and he had an air of importance about him. Not arrogance or conceit exactly, but the easy confidence of a man who is used to his very order being obeyed. So, Dr. Blackwood, I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say. His expression one of pleasant attentiveness. Wilson pulled a package of Borkum Riff from the top desk drawer and stuffed tobacco into the bowl of his pipe, then tamped it down with practiced skill. On the wall above his head, a boldly lettered sign proclaimed, "Designated Smoking Area." I'm willing to listen because Suzanne here speaks very highly of you. He winked fondly at her. Do you mind? Wilson nodded at the pipe and looked questioningly at them. Not at all, Suzanne said. Harrison shook his head. Actually, he did mind, but for the time being he wanted to stay on the general's good side. Nasty habit, actually, Wilson said cheerfully. I've tried several times to quit since the Army's going to be smokeless by 1990, but not with much success. I may be forced into early retirement. He chuckled at his own humor. Harrison cleared his throat, ignoring the curious look Suzanne was giving him. Surprised to see him nervous, no doubt, and ran a finger under his collar. Damn tie. How could anyone think with one of these stupid things cutting off the blood flow to the brain? He never wore the torturous things, and had a good notion to pull it off right now. What the hell difference would it make? A lousy tie wouldn't be the deciding factor on whether or not the general believed what he had to say. Still, insecurity held him back. I had hoped you would listen, General, for the simple reason that what I have to say is vitally important to all of us, and to our national security. Harrison managed to say it respectfully enough so that the general didn't take offense, but raised an interested brow. Wilson struck a match, held it to the bowl, and sucked it in. "Go ahead," he said between puffs. "You've certainly got my attention." "All right." Harrison paused, choosing his words carefully. "Have you ever heard of the Forrester Project, General?" Wilson drew on his pipe, one elbow resting on his desk, and furrowed his brow. "Forrester? That was a long time ago, wasn't it? Back in the 50s. 1953, to be exact." Harrison leaned forward, encouraged that Wilson should remember. "We're talking about the invasion, then?" "The alien invasion, yes. I don't see why everyone in the military is so reluctant to say that word." Wilson narrowed pale blue eyes behind a puff of smoke. "For a scientist, you have a tendency to overgeneralize, Doctor. I'm a military man, and I'm willing to say the word alien, but if the military is reluctant to use it, perhaps it's because of the hysteria that followed." He glanced from Suzanne to Harrison. "I'm sure you're both too young to remember—" "I remember," Harrison interrupted hotly. "I was there." Suzanne shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I see." Wilson's teeth clicked against the stem of his pipe. He held 2 fingers to the pipe bowl to steady it as he spoke. "Well, I'm sorry to hear that. You must have been terribly young." His tone was sympathetic, but matter-of-fact. "Yes, I remember the Forrester Project. As a matter of fact, I'm old enough to remember it well. I had just enlisted. Forrester was the one who went around scaring people, saying the aliens weren't really dead. The Army interred the aliens at great cost to the government to prevent a full-scale panic. I was on cleanup detail." Out of the corner of his eye, Harrison saw Suzanne cringe. "I kept my parents' surname," Harrison said, "but I'm Clayton Forrester's adopted son." His tone was heavy with repressed anger. And he was right. The pipe clicked against Wilson's teeth again as he digested this without any outward reaction. "That's a very startling claim. I trust you brought proof." Harrison smiled thinly and reached for the briefcase by his feet. Handsome oxblood leather, another expensive present from Shar he almost never used, like the yellow silk tie around his neck. He set the briefcase on his lap, snapped it open, and pulled out a file that he tossed onto Wilson's desk. "I'm glad you remember the Forrester Project. It saves me a lot of explanation, but there's a copy of the report issued by Forrester's research group in there, just to refresh your memory." Wilson opened the file and began to glance through it. "To summarize," Harrison continued, "Forrester was worried about the fact that the alien bodies and tissue samples simply didn't demonstrate any deterioration as dead, decaying tissues should. It seemed as if they were in a type of," he decided against using the scientific term for Wilson's sake, "suspended animation, so to speak. Forrester asked the government for funding to do more research, more analysis, so that we'd know enough about the aliens to stop them the next time." "The next time?" Wilson asked with gentle surprise, and tilted his broad, jowly face up at Harrison. Harrison smiled wryly. "I should have said, in the event of another alien attack." He shut the briefcase and put it back down by his feet. "It's not a particularly popular topic. Dr. Forrester and I have become used to being labeled paranoid." Next to him, Suzanne squirmed guiltily. "Why don't you just take a look at the old photographs in there, General?" He nodded at the file in Wilson's hands. "The ones of the barrels stamped 1953. I'll bet you can even tell me what's inside them." Wilson rifled through the file and found what he was looking for. "I can," he said cautiously, scrutinizing Harrison. "But it's classified." "Maybe." Harrison's tone became confidential. "You've also heard of a place called Jericho Valley?" Wilson put the file down and stared at Harrison with his full attention. "What do you know about Jericho Valley, Dr. Blackwood?" Harrison and Suzanne glanced triumphantly at each other. So he'd finally struck a nerve. "It's a long story," Harrison began. "One of my colleagues intercepted a very unusual transmission emanating from inside the Jericho Valley installation, one that was answered." "By whom?" Wilson leaned forward across his desk. "A resident of one of the star systems in the constellation Taurus. That's as much as we know right now. I have a recording of that very transmission to a Lieutenant Colonel Paul Ironhorse. I suspect he's having it analyzed right now. A copy of the computer runs are in there for you." Harrison nodded at the file. "If you let your people look at it, they'll come to the same conclusion we did, that a bona fide communication took place." Wilson unfolded the printout onto the desk. He studied it for a moment before he muttered, "Incredible." He addressed Harrison. "But I fail to see how this proves anything about your aliens." "Unfortunately, I don't have pictures of the barrels I saw at Jericho Valley. Colonel Ironhorse let us have a look." At Wilson's sharp glance, he hastily explained, "Both Suzanne and I have the necessary security clearance to do so. Anyway, I noticed something very alarming. The barrels, the same barrels you see in that photo, were gone. Hundreds of them. Vanished. And 6 of them were on their sides, empty, as if whatever was inside forced its way out." "It's true," Suzanne volunteered. "I saw them too. I can verify that the markings on the empty barrels at Jericho Valley are identical to those on the barrels in the photograph." "And if you don't believe us," Harrison added, heartened by the fact that Wilson actually seemed to be listening thus far, "you can check with Lieutenant Colonel Paul Ironhorse to get the markings stamped on those barrels. The point of all this is, there was a nuclear waste spill at Jericho Valley. The place was hot with radiation. I believe the level was high enough to kill off the bacteria in the alien systems, which in turn brought them out of their suspended state." He stopped and anxiously searched the general's face for a reaction. Wilson's expression was one of concern, but otherwise unreadable. The general took his pipe from his mouth, set it in an ashtray, then leaned forward and folded his hands on top of his desk. "That," he said slowly, "is the most fantastic story I think I've ever heard." "It's not a story," Harrison said desperately. God, he couldn't afford to be turned away now. "It's a scientific theory supported by a body of fact, presented in a logical and reasonable fashion. I'm a respected astrophysicist." He shook his head. "Not some kook spouting stories about UFOs." "I didn't mean to suggest otherwise, Doctor." Wilson paused to choose his words carefully. "The fact that you were brought here by my niece gives you more credibility than you realize." "Niece?" Harrison did a double-take, frowning first at Wilson and then at Suzanne. "I thought you said he was a friend of your father's." Why the hell hadn't she said anything? Here he was, thinking that she and Wilson were, well, anything but familiar in their relationship. And he would have worried far less about their chances of getting help from the general if he'd known the guy was Suzanne's uncle. Suzanne smiled sweetly at Wilson. "Uncle Hank is my father's favorite brother." Wilson beamed back. "And you're my favorite niece." Old Home Week. Encouraged, Harrison began to smile himself. "So you're willing to help us, General?" The warm smile vanished. Wilson was all military again. "Unfortunately, Doctor, I'll need some hard evidence before I can act on your theory." He reached into the inbox on one corner of his desk, fished out a thick manuscript, and started flipping through it. Just this morning, as a matter of fact, I received a report on the incident you make reference to. He broke off to scan a page. Which suggests the work of a terrorist group. Ah, here it is. He touched a thick, stubby finger to the paper and squinted at it. Can't read this damn small print without my glasses. The People's Liberation Party? Harrison felt himself sink from triumph down into despair. He sat forward on the edge of his chair. General, I've already given you evidence, and I'm trying to warn you about something a lot more dangerous than terrorists. Terrorists didn't leave with those barrels. The 6 revived aliens did. Just because those barrels were empty doesn't mean the aliens walked out, Doctor. The general replied patiently. What real proof do you have that the aliens are alive? It's far more likely that the terrorists stole them. What possible use would terrorists have for them? Harrison asked him angrily. To instigate panic, for one thing. What about the transmission, General? How are you going to explain that away? Try to look at it from my point of view, Dr. Blackwood. No, look at it from mine. Before he knew it, Harrison was on his feet, bent over the desk, shoving his face into Wilson's. He was vaguely aware that he was shouting and that Suzanne was going through paroxysms of embarrassment. But he didn't care. In the back of his mind, a phrase kept repeating. Clayton was wrong. I should never have wasted my time coming to Washington. Goddamn military, they'll kill us all through their stupidity. Goddamn military, they'll kill us all. Please take your seat, Doctor. Wilson was repeating calmly, but Harrison ignored him. These creatures are completely ruthless, General, without mercy. They see us as something less than animals, an inconvenience to be done away with. 35 years ago, they tried to take over the world, killed millions of people, and no one wants to remember. Well, I can't forget. They killed my parents, and, General, this time they won't stop until we're all dead. You, me, Suzanne. Wilson blinked at him and picked up his pipe again. I'm sorry, Doctor. His tone was gentle. Harrison stopped, slightly dazed by his own outburst, but unrepentant. Still leaning over the desk, he glared at Wilson. For a moment, no one spoke. Bring me something concrete, Wilson said finally. I'll see that it gets to the proper people. You have my word. There isn't time, Harrison told him bitterly. Concrete. Jesus, what more did the man want? Feeling defeated and furious, he wheeled around and strode out of the office, afraid if he stayed a second longer he'd say something to the general that even his niece would be unable to smooth over. Yet, as furious as he was, his mind was already racing to find a solution to Wilson's challenge. The jerk wants hard evidence, huh? And by God, I'll find a way to give him that if it's the last, and it probably will be, thing that I do. He didn't break his rapid stride until he was back out in the waiting area. It was devoid of people, save for a lone receptionist who was busily fielding incoming phone calls. Harrison tore off the tie. Good riddance. Tossed the briefcase on a chair, opened it, and pulled out the portable phone. He dialed the Institute number, then checked his watch as he remembered the 3-hour time difference. It was 11:30 here in D.C., which meant there was about a 50-50 chance that Norton would be there this time of the morning, probably just setting the coffee up now. The Institute's switchboard operator answered. Extension 5900, Harrison said. Behind him came the sound of heels clicking against the uncarpeted floor at top speed. Suzanne. She walked up beside him, her scowl fiercely disapproving, her posture rigid, tight, angry. If you expect people to help you, she began in a low voice that rose in volume, you'd better learn to be a hell of a lot more gracious. You were impossibly rude to my uncle back there. The world doesn't have time for graciousness, he snapped, so vehemently that she recoiled slightly. The General wants concrete proof, does he? I suppose that means depositing a live alien on his desk. Well, by God, I'll get him one if that's what it takes. But we're giving them time, Suzanne. Time they can use against us. We're giving them too much time. Harrison. Norton's voice came over the receiver. He was shouting in an effort to interrupt. Harrison, did you call me just so I could listen to you and Suzanne arguing? He took a deep breath and forced himself to speak calmly. Sorry, Norton. There was a pause, and then Norton said, Doesn't sound like things are going too well for us. They're not. Harrison met Suzanne's worried eyes and shook his head. The Army's decided our proof isn't enough. Looks like we've got some work to do. Back at his desk, Wilson puffed thoughtfully on his pipe for a moment before reaching out to press the button on his intercom. Miss Underwood, see that I'm put on the President's afternoon calendar. Then connect me with Lieutenant Colonel Paul Ironhorse.